Okay, I think we might kick it off now. Welcome all to this interest group session for the Global Open Research Commons interest group. My name's Andrew Treloar and I work for the Australian Research Data Commons. And what we want to do today is give you an overview of how we've got to where we are today. Spend a little bit of time just telling you about a project that you may be unaware of called the RDA for EOS project. I will then hand over to one of my co-chairs, Sarah Jones. You can see her photo down the bottom on the left, who will take us through some examples of commons from a number of different presenters, and then a group activity looking at what you see as the most important elements for a research commons. And then Karen Payne, another of my co-chairs, will give you an update on the Global Open Research Commons Benchmarking Working Group, which has had a session already at this plenary and is having a repeat session tomorrow. And then we'll talk about the next steps. As you can see from the photos, this is an interest group with a wide range of co-chairs, diverse on a range of dimensions: geography, gender, ethnicity, amount of hair. It's great to have that level of diversity in what is looking at how to build global infrastructure. So my thanks to all of them for their contribution to the presentation. So let me start off with what we mean by a research commons or a data commons. So we started this by looking at lots and lots of definitions. We pulled out keywords from those definitions to see if there was convergence. We spent a long time debating to come up with a common definition that was sufficiently acceptable to all of the people. And as you'll see in a little while, we did this over a number of plenaries. So what you're seeing in terms of the definition of what we mean by a research commons is the product of quite a lot of work. And the definition we've landed on is a global, and it occurs to me that I actually really should update those slides and change that to research commons rather than data commons. I will do that. So the definition we've landed on is a global trusted ecosystem that provides seamless access to high quality interoperable research outputs and services. And let me assure you that every single word of that definition, with the possible exception of a, that, and to, have been carefully considered and fought over. So that's where we've landed. That's a little bit long to kind of trip off the tongue. So the short version that we've landed on is digital research resources for the common good. So it's a nice sort of shorthand. The graphic that you see on the right is a one-page infographic that provides a summary overview of this particular interest group. It's been created by this RDA for EOS project, as you'll see down the bottom. And I'll talk more a little about that project in a little while. But essentially, as you can see from the infographic, this is drawing on a whole range of different international activities, some of which you'll hear about in a minute. And has a particular purpose and a remit that I'll talk about now. Okay, so if that's a research commons, why are we having a global open research commons interest group? Why did we set this interest group up? And it came together out of a number of conversations over coffee back when we could still meet in real life and have conversations over coffee, where we realized that a number of us were working essentially in the same kind of area. So we thought there was, first of all, value in trying to come up with a shared understanding of what we mean by a commons. So the word commons was being used in a lot of different contexts, and we wanted to pin down what we all meant by that. We wanted to look outside the RDA community to connect with a range of initiatives, some of them national, the organization I work for, some of them regional, like the European Open Science Cloud, and some of them international. And we saw the interest group as an opportunity to coordinate those different initiatives and both work towards more coordinated delivery of a global open research commons, as well as keep an eye on relevant activities that were happening within some of the RDA working groups and the other initiatives. And so we set this interest group up as an opportunity to have those conversations. As you can see from this slide, I think I have Karen to thank for this one, or possibly Mark. This is work that started at the plenary in Berlin in 2018. We continued on at International Data Week in Gaborone in 2018, at the end of 2018. Again in Philadelphia, further work in September of 2019, the formal launch of the interest group at the last physical plenary that RDA was able to hold in Helsinki in October of 2019, and the creation of a Birds of a Feather session on international benchmarking in November of last year. That's turned into a working group that is currently going through the RDA approval processes, but Karen will talk more about towards the end of this session. So this is something that's been in discussion for 3 years now. And over that time, the area of what a commons is has matured and developed, and our understanding as a group of what we could usefully do has also developed and grown. I've talked about the definition of what a commons might contain. This is a model based on work done by the OSF.io organization and Brian Nosek that encapsulates how we see a commons operating. And the key point about this particular diagram that we'd like you to take away is it's not just the technology. In fact, the technology is almost the easiest bit. So yes, you need storage and compute to make a commons possible. And you need platforms and tools to make it easy for people to use their storage and compute. But you need so much more. So you need frameworks and standards. And clearly RDA has got a significant role to play there with its varieties of working groups. You need skills and training so that it's easy for people to use the commons. Again, RDA's got a number of groups relating to that. You need policy and incentives, and national initiatives have got a role to play around the policy and incentives. And you need communities and a shared culture to agree on how to use the commons. And again, RDA's got a number of groups that relate to that. And you need all of these in order to have an effective research commons. So I've mentioned a couple of times this RDA for EOS activity. So this is an activity that was funded through an EOS Secretariat open call. It's a joint activity between the Research Data Alliance, Digital Repository of Ireland, led by Natalie Harrower, and the Digital Curation Centre, whose staff are heavily involved in this particular plenary and who've been doing fantastic support work in all of the sessions that I've been in. It's a relatively short-run project through to the end of May this year. It's designed to improve alignment between RDA activities and the EOS Future Project, which is going to start in April of this year. In fact, may have even already started, who knows? Well, Sarah will know, I suspect, and can possibly comment on that in a minute. It's got 5 pillars of activity. I've given a link to the document down the bottom that provides an overview of this, but pillar 3 is about connecting EOS with international stakeholders. And so pillar 3 is specifically supporting connections between RDA and EOS. That's where that infographic came from. And ahead of this plenary, the project called for one-page overviews of a number of different commons activities around the world. We, in the interest group, are discussing whether we might produce those, bundle them together as a supporting output. But I expect that they will be included in a report from that project, which, as I say, is due to conclude soon. So if you're looking for short summary overviews of a number of different commons, expect to see that within the next 2 or 3 months. Okay, so that's really all I wanted to say from an overview point of view. Let me stop screen sharing and pass to Sarah.
Sorry, it's taken me a minute to get my audio and my video on. Okay.
I did like the still image.
New gloves that I knitted. I was getting the mick taken out of me that I was knitting gloves in April, but actually it's still been quite cold in the Netherlands, and they're needed for when you cycle. So I will also share my screen. So I have a very brief presentation as well. Let me put this up full screen just to talk through some of that work that Andrew was mentioning about the typology of the commons and what we've been doing around that. And then we have some lightning talks. So I'll walk you through the lightning talks as well. And then what we want to do, we want to try and make this session quite interactive. We want to hear from you about your work or what elements you see as part of the commons. So we can, I'm sorry, my buzzer's going. I'm just going to ignore it. Hopefully it's not too distracting in the background. And then in the exercise, we can discuss, what the key elements of the commons are. So what we did at the start, so this predates the work that Andrew was mentioning that's been supported by the RDA for EOS project. We looked at kind of similar initiatives that were out there. So the EOS, the ADRDC, the work that's going on in Africa and with the open science platform there, NIH Data Commons and various other initiatives. And we tried to pull together the various different models that they had to describe their work and look at the key elements in their kind of diagrams of the infrastructure. And this was so we could try and, harmonize on a set of elements, which could be a model for the commons, but also so we could identify, ways that we could align our different initiatives or, work with common standards when we're implementing certain aspects of that infrastructure. Now, I'm only going to show you part of this work. I focused on a few key models that we looked at, which aren't going to be presented in the lightning talks. But as Andrew had mentioned, we've also recently been doing some work reaching out to the different initiatives with the support of the RDA for EOS project. And they've been providing descriptions of their work, which we'll go on and publish through the interest group. And we'll hear some talks from those later on. So the first model, and one that I actually find really quite helpful, is the NIH Data Commons. I like the kind of stack model here, the way that they have at the very base this compute platform, and then they have the data aggregated above that, and then a set of software and tools. I personally find that quite a useful way to look at the different layers of the commons. And on the side here, you can see they've got the digital object compliance. In other models, we might have things like FAIR referenced. And I think the importance of how the standards kind of bleed through these different elements of the stack are also really important to consider. Within EOS, we have a few different models. So this EOS Action Lines, the kind of 6 areas, this is what came out from the European Commission when they were essentially developing their frameworks for funding, and they were deciding what are the key aspects that need to be addressed. So they focused on, having the core EOS architecture, the data, because EOS is about federating the data and the services so that we have a virtual environment in which people can work. Key to that is making sure that we have a good access and interface so people can use that data, a set of rules, and within EOS, when we were setting up the groups, we had a rules of participation group to define what it means to be either a user or a service provider within EOS, and also the governance. And I think some of these aspects which aren't really infrastructure blocks, so things like the governance or the training or skills, are also really critical. And I see there's comments in the chat about whether the presentations will be shared. They definitely will be. So you can get all these images. If possible, we might be able to link to the drive so you can get them directly now, or we'll put them on the RRDA page. On the right, you can see a more updated version of the kind of EOS model, like the very basic architecture. We've got this notion of having a core set of services, which includes the elements like the network, the compute, the AAI, and then we're federating the data. And the EOS exchange layer is where you have this whole suite of services that is more of a competitive environment where there might be multiple different tools for analysis. So like the NIH model, it's kind of like a 3-layer stack like that. This example that comes from Karen, the WDS web stack, again, this is looking at a whole range of elements. So thinking from the hardware at the very base layer, working its way up through all the different layers here. So the database, the web server, the software. And again, trying to think about some of these more kind of human elements. So engaging with the range of stakeholders, having appropriate governance and standards in place. And the fourth one that I wanted to flag that's come from Mark, the Canadian National Data Services Infrastructure, again, at this kind of base layer, having the storage and compute and network services, multiple different repository systems that are being brought together, and then above that, having all the different services and the platforms and the tools. I think this is kind of more similar to the ADRDC model. And again, you can see the international standards and FAIR flagged at the side of this as something that kind of bleeds through all these different elements. So what we want to focus on later on is trying to think about how we should be describing these different elements of the commons. And this is something that Andrew had put together, taking some of those keywords from the different models. So we have these kind of supporting elements like the governance, the sustainability, the engagement, the human capacity, the kind of skills or training. And then we have some of the more infrastructure elements like the layered stack like we'd see in the NIH model. The core infrastructure, the network, the compute, the data, the software and tooling. And Andrew's just clarifying, this is a deliberately bad diagram because we don't want to sway your views. We're really just trying to get an overview of what the elements are so that we can then actually visualize it in a nicer way. So as Andrew had mentioned before, we saw a series of inputs from various different groups that are operating commons-like infrastructure. So including some that we're already familiar with, like EOS and ADRDC, but also bringing in groups like NII, National Institute of Informatics, the KISTI in Korea. We'd looked at a Nordic collaboration that's kind of like a mini EOS, La Referencia, and a number of domain groups as well. So the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, which is really focused on developing standards, which I think, although it's not operating a commons itself, I think those standards are a really key building block of how we implement our commons. And IVOA and other groups like Data One and CESDA. And I know we've got a number of people in the audience from these groups, so it would be great to get your feedback in the discussion. The 4 that you see in bold here are the 4 that are going to give us some lightning talks. So we'll drill in a bit more detail into these examples, and then we'll use that to help seed the discussion around what these core elements are. So I'm going to stop my screen share there and invite Kazu to put on his video and audio. Kazu, can you hear us just now? Let me just check.
Yes, I'm trying to share my screen. Yep. This moment.
Excellent. Yeah, no worries.
I can see my desktop.
Yep.
Yeah.
We see it. Excellent.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
So, okay, in our case, as a NII, National Institute of Informatics in Japan, by getting the budget from the Ministry of Education and Research in Japan, we are right now developing the platform named the NIH Research Data Cloud, which is composed by the 3 different components. So in case of the publication and the discovery platforms, we are extending the existing service functionalities into the research data as well. And these platforms are targeting on basically the contents open in public. On the other hand, to support the full research data lifecycle, by our service, we decided to develop the new service for the research data management, which is named the Gakuni RDM, and forked from the open science framework. And our NII RDC is in position, and some of you guys has already been joined to the previous inland session. Our service is in position on top of the network named SciNet and Identity and Access Management Federation and our cloud service. And not only the Identity and Access Management Federation, and in my opinion, in this kind of, the middleware, sharing the larger organization information is also so important. But anyway, our NII RDC will move on to the production level operation from this year, and to extend our service functionality, we are right now developing the new component for the data governance, data analysis, curation, and training platforms in addition to the existing 3 different component platforms. For instance, in case of the data analysis component, it allows users to use the data analysis environment from our Gakuni RDM platform very easily, and also intended to effective use of the existing computing resources over Japan, and also try to facilitate a reproducibility of the research output by packing the research data as well as a source code and environmental value, and try to open in public through our publication platform. And in case of our data governance component, it's right now intended to use the DMP or DMP from the viewpoint of the RDM. And our DMP system is intended to utilize the DMP document as a living document, and not only just for submitting the DMP for the funding agency, but also try to orchestrate our existing platform through the DMP document, and also try to support the project manager or PI. And right now, our data governance platform just around the DMP, but for instance, in the EU, their EU Data Governance Act will come in this year. So we are always looking for how does it work for the affect to the EOS, and also try to watch the GAIA-X, the functionalities from the viewpoint of the data governance. And like this, we are basically intended to utilize the de facto or international standard like this way. So I'd be very happy to discuss this kind of, the standards or the de facto in the panel discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kazu. Very, very helpful overview to see all of those different aspects, how you're addressing the governance going forward, and also the range of standards. Because I think when we can see alignments across those, it's going to help us collaborating globally. I don't think we've got any questions in just yet, so I'll move on to the second presenter, but by all means put things in the Q&A as we go along, and we can also cover it in the discussion. So next up, it's Andrew Trelaw again. We get to have some of the exciting bald head, given that you were commenting on hair before. take it away, Andrew.
So yes, thank you for the opportunity to give you an overview of the Australian Research Data Commons. So we are part of a thing called the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure for Australia, NCRIS, which is a government funding program for research infrastructure, not just e-research infrastructure, but all kinds of infrastructure that's been running for close to 15 years now. Some of you may have heard of the predecessor organizations for the Australian Research Data Commons. So we came together in the last couple of years. Prior to that, we were 3 discrete organizations: the Australian National Data Service, where I spent most of my career, the Research Data Services Organization, RDS, and NECTAR, the National E-Research Collaboration Tools and Resources Project. So they came together to form this thing called the Australian Research Data Commons under the leadership of our CEO, Rosie Hicks, who I believe is sitting in the back of this talk, keeping tabs on me and giving me marks that I'll no doubt hear about later. So the purpose of the ADRDC, the high level purpose, is that we want to provide Australian researchers with a competitive advantage through data. And I should explain that that doesn't mean that only Australian researchers can use our services. We want Australia to be an attractive collaboration target for overseas researchers, but we are of course funded by the Australian taxpayer. And so we want to make sure that Australian researchers get the best possible benefit. The mission that we are following in order to deliver on that purpose is that we want to accelerate research and innovation. Australia has, for a number of years now, had a strong focus on the role of innovation as a benefit to society. And we want to do that by driving excellence in creation, analysis, and retention of high quality data assets. Now, we're not the only players, and this is one of a number of these layered diagrams that we're going to see. So this diagram describes some of the other players in the ecosystem that we're working in. The DDIRP acronym that you will see up on the top right-hand side stands for the Digital Data and E-Resources capability, and that consists of AAF, the Access Australia Federation, who are responsible for authentication and authorization, ARNet, the Australian Academic and Research Network, who are the Australian NREN, the Australian Research Data Commons, the organisation I work for, NCI, the National Computational Infrastructure, and PAWSI, who are our 2 high-performance computing centres, as well as a range of commercial providers. And what the diagram is trying to represent here, and you can see it's at a high level at least quite similar to the diagram that Sarah was showing you at the end of her segment. We have underpinning infrastructure, we have data assets, and we have tools that operate on top of that. And we don't provide everything. And in fact, some of those groups provide multiple things. So the high performance computing folks, for instance, do their own data retention. They run some of their own virtual laboratories or platforms. They have some of their own tools. So it's a complex ecosystem of providers. The high-level summary of what we provide is that we are working across four topic areas. And these, if you like, are covering aspects that plug into one another in ways to ensure that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So you shouldn't think of these as just vertical silos. They're very much connected and reinforcing. And because we're a national infrastructure, some of the things that we do are different to just strict information infrastructure. So the people and policy area has got a strong focus on improving the human capacity within the country, but also engaging with national research funders around policy issues, particularly around data policy, and over time we imagine around areas like software policy as well. The platforms and software, the area that I'm responsible for, is looking to accelerate research and support collaboration. And we have investments both in a range of different research-oriented e-research platforms or virtual research environments or science gateways, depending on what they're called in your country, as well as an increasing focus on research software. And one of my colleagues, Tom Honeyman, has been involved in a number of the software discussions in the plenary to date. Data and services, we're the Australian Research Data Commons. So naturally, data and services is a significant part of what we do. We have an active program underway to build up the range of national data assets. We have a whole range of services under what we call national information infrastructure. So handles for persistent identifiers, data site DOIs, research vocabulary services, a national research discovery service called Research Data Australia. So a whole range of services there to make it easier for people to improve the value of their research data assets. And lastly, and this is a piece that came in when we merged with Nectar and the RDS projects, we have a significant investment in a research compute cloud based on OpenStack, as well as a significant investment in data retention. So we provide infrastructure, we work with data and provide services over that data. We have e-research platforms that let users analyze and present that data. And we have programs around policy and people to ensure that people are able to use that infrastructure. And that's probably all I want to say at this stage. Thank you, Sarah.
Excellent. Hopefully I'm back on. Thank you very much, Andrew. That's great. Okay, so our third talk is on the International Virtual Observatory Alliance from Chen Zhao Hui. If you're able to unmute and hopefully share slides, let us know if you have any issues with that. I saw you pop up a minute ago, so I think hopefully the button you pressed worked if you just do that again. Excellent. Hi, Chen Zhao.
Yeah, hello.
Hi. Are
Can
you
you
able?
hear me?
We hear you fine. Are you able to share your slides?
Yeah,
Or do you
can you
want to speak? Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, it's loading up. So if you put that into full screen mode, then we're good to go.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. It's not in full screen yet. If you click it to view full, like view full slideshow.
Yeah. So I'm very happy here to share our experience about the International Virtual Observatory Alliance. The Interoperability Commons for astronomical data. Here I share the idea of the virtual observatory. We know the web is transparent, and the goal of the virtual observatory is to achieve the same feeling for astronomical data, and that is it is all available to explore in a single transparent system. And we hope astronomical data sets, tools, services should work seamlessly together. And I give a definition for the virtual observatory. The virtual observatory is a data-intensively online astronomical research and education environment, taking advantages of advanced information technologies to achieve seamless global access to astronomical information. The International Virtual Observatory Islands is an organization that debates and agrees the technical standards that are needed to make the VO possible. And the IVOA is a focal point for VO aspirations and a framework for discussing and sharing VO ideas and technologies.
Hi,
The
Chenzo.
islands,
Sorry,
yeah,
sorry to butt in. We're not seeing your slides advance. I don't know if you've moved on to.
can you see my slides?
We see the slides, but we just see the edit mode, so not the presenter mode, and it's not moved on. I think if you've advanced the slide, okay.
Okay.
Can you pop it in presenter mode? It's the little icon at the bottom of the screen that's like a presentation. Yep. Oh,
How about
yep.
this current? Okay, yeah.
I think
Okay.
two across, two icons across from where your mouse was.
Can you see the full screen?
No, still the edit mode, not the full presentation mode. But that's okay.
Yeah, I share again.
Sorry to. I think sometimes Juno doesn't like to play.
Is it okay now?
Ah, perfect, perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm sorry. So the islands was created in 2002, and currently the current consists of 21 members VO projects global around the globe. And currently we have 6 working groups and 8 interest groups. The islands will organize 2 interoperability meetings per year. The first one usually in May, and the second one will be in October or November. The main comments from the IVOA is interoperability standards. During the last 2 cases, about 46 standards have been defined by the islands, by the working groups and interest groups. Here, you can see the full list for the current defined standards for astronomical data interoperability, including application, data access interface, data models, grid and web services, registry for resources, semantics, the scientific data preservation, and the VO events. I mean, the virtual observatory event, astronomical events, message systems. So these 46 or tens of standards are really commons for astronomical research. And based on these standards, here is architecture for the virtual observatory. Since the beginning of the VO, we share the same principle for the popular FIRE. That means friendable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So we provided the funding, guiding access, and interoperability, and using the astronomical resources, including data, computing, software, and networks. Here are some examples from the IVOA VO project members. And we see there are some applications and services driven by these IVOA protocols and standards. And at the same time, we have many web portals, and online science platforms provided by different data centers around the globe. So this is my lightning talk, and I share the outcomes from the IVOA and the WIL members. Thank you.
The interoperability and the sharing globally in the community. So our final talk now will be from Angela from the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. And I think we'll have another kind of focus on standards. If you want to try it, let me know if you have any issues with screen sharing.
All right, let me see.
The icon after the video and audio one.
Can you hear me okay?
We hear you fine, Anne. That's looking good. Excellent.
Great. So hi, everyone. I'm Angela Page from Director of Strategy and Engagement for the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. This is my first RDA meeting, so I'm really excited to be here and get to sort of know this landscape. And it's just really cool to follow a talk about astronomical data. The Global Alliance for Genomics National Standards Development Organization for Genomic Science. We were founded in 2014 as in response to the sort of awareness that as the cost of genome sequencing was decreasing, there was going to be just an influx of data coming from both research, where it had sort of genomic data had always lived, as well as now increasingly the medical community as it's being used for diagnosis and treatment. So the opportunity there inherent in that medical data is that if we can enable secondary use, we will have access to, and we could have access to a virtual cohort of 60 million samples or more. And that's a sort of back of the envelope calculation that we've done to sort of figure out how much genomic data should be coming down the pike from healthcare specifically. And if we can achieve this, we will have great opportunity in terms of demonstrating patterns in health and disease and basic biology, is all the way through to advancing precision medicine. So these are the aims and activities of GA4GH. We were founded in 2014, and sort of if you look at that, the scale here, so like around 2014, there still was not a lot of data, but there was, but not as much as say astronomy, and we could see that it was coming, but it was still sort of unclear exactly how this sort of harmonization alliance group could be relevant. And around 2017, when we really did start to see that uptick in data, we refocused and really put all of our effort into, well, most of our effort into developing tangible, finite standards, technical standards for sharing data. We support sort of many different approaches to data sharing, whether it's centralized genomic knowledge bases. Some of you might be familiar with ClinGen, where people deposit their knowledge about genomic variation into a central location. And Data Commons is sort of one of the pieces that we look at, and we've defined that as a trusted, controlled, single repository of multiple data sets. Although I'm really excited to be here and sort of think if we need to redefine how we're thinking about Data Commons is. GA4GH standards really sort of the value that we can add for future data sharing. I think in particular in genomic data, we're talking about sharing personal health information that can be identifiable. So a lot of times it has to stay where it lives. It can't leave the country. It can't be deposited into a Data Commons if that's not where it was generated. And specifically, if we're talking about it coming out of healthcare, patient data. So standards, so GA4GH standards are about, if we all kind of agree to doing things the same way, then we can link up in a sort of federated model, whether it's a hub and spoke model with a centralized governance, or a much more distributed model where just by virtue of using the same standards, we're all able to work together. So also in 2017, GA4GH rolled out the concept of a driver project. These are, so GA4GH is a huge community, and there are 600 plus organizations that have committed to the value of data sharing and said, yes, we are sort of signed up. But these 24 have actually committed resources, and at least 2 full-time equivalents must participate in GA4GH standards development. And then they've also committed to piloting our standards in real-world use cases. So the sort of bread and butter of GA4GH, the actual workhorses where stuff gets done, are our 8 work streams. 6 of these are technical work streams, and they're dealing with things, sort of hurdles in data sharing all across the data sharing lifecycle, whether it's capturing and exchanging clinical and phenotypic data, sharing data in the cloud, user authentication and authorization, discovering data, representing, annotating the genome or variant data. And as large-scale genomics, as genomics, increasingly becomes more and more large-scale, how do we share data without the use of file formats, because eventually, or without the use of files, because eventually the data will be so large-scale that it won't be realistic to share, to share a file, over the internet. And then underpinning all of this is our 2 foundational work streams, the regulatory and ethics and data security, and they both review everything that comes out of the other 6 for best practice in those 2 spaces, regulatory ethics and data security. And then they also themselves produce guidance and policies in those spaces. Oh, I'm going over time. Sorry, I'm going to really quickly fly through these. So this is just a diagram of sort of the healthcare research data landscape that we see ourselves fitting into. And here you can see all of the GA4GH standards, and this is a really busy, small slide, so I can share this later if you want more detail. And then this is so this is our vision. This is a version of that vision actually happening in practice, where Australian Genomic Health Alliance has put GA4GH standards into practice in their pipeline. And to the extent that other initiatives do similar things, we'll start to see these initiatives, these national initiatives, be able to share data across one another, tapping into that global cohort that I described earlier. And then this is I'll just try to really quickly fly through this. So this is a demonstration of GA4GH standards in practice. And here we're seeing 4 discrete stacks, which have implemented a number of GA4GH standards. Here we see one stack that has implemented several standards, many more than you see here. And then this is the ultimate vision, where you have all of these different stacks implementing several standards, so that we can eventually get to a point where they can share data across one another seamlessly. And these are the participants in the demo so far. And then I'll just point you to this link, which is a short animated video showing the sort of vision in practice that we're very proud of. So that is it for me, and I don't know how to stop. There we go.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Angela. And I think seeing those standards implemented by those different organizations, and that vision, like you say, of connecting everything up is really key. So I haven't seen anything in the Q&A, but I would like to just give a moment, if anyone in the audience has questions to those different Lightning Talk presenters about the different models that they've put forward, by all means add those in here, and we can put those to them. If not, in a moment, we'll move on to the exercise. But there was one comment in the chat earlier from Mark Diedrich about an example that he could give from the European data space world. Actually, there's one question that's come in now. How do these huge multinational efforts translate to institutional level? I don't know if anyone wants to speak on that, about how ADRDC, for example, is filtering down to actually affect, researchers day to day within their institutions, or how some of these domain-specific examples also feed down to the practice at institutional level. Would any of the speakers like to comment on that? And then we'll invite Mark up.
So I can talk to the ADRDC. So we have an active program of work with research producing institutions, ensuring that the services we provide are embedded into the systems that mostly universities, provide for their researchers, as well as an entire skills program looking to improve the human skills across Australia. We also work very closely with a number of the domain-specific national research infrastructure capabilities around Australia, again, to support them with e-research platforms with underpinning infrastructure, to ensure that our services for data discovery and minting data site DOIs are embedded into their systems. I'm thinking here of things like Atlas of Living Australia, Terrestrial Ecosystems Research Network, Bioplatforms Australia, Integrated Marine Observing System. So there's a range of those domain-specific infrastructures that we also work with.
Yeah, and I'm gonna jump in. So Claudia's just I've maybe misinterpreted this question. So what she was wanting to ask is how we can scale down these implementations of architecture to institutional level. So I don't know if that changes some of your reflections, or also what Angela may want to say.
I'm sorry, I'll pass to Angela because I've already said stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, again, I'm new here, so I don't know if this is exactly what you're looking for, but for GA4GH, it really is up to the institutions to implement the standards locally in order for that international vision to come to fruition. And so we do, I mean, we work with, everyone from a small research university to these larger things. So it really is, but I don't know how to answer the what should be eliminated / added. I'm not sure if you could say more about that.
Okay.
And the only thing that I would add to that is that there are some things that it just makes sense to provide nationally. Yes, network. You can scale. Yeah, network, data site DOI registration service, research data discovery. I mean, you can do those lots of little pieces locally, but then you've got to federate them together. There is actually economies of scale arguments for some of those.
Excellent. Okay, thank you both. I'll just briefly invite Mark Diedrich up to speak to that European space example, and then we'll move on. If you want to start looking in the shared notes, what we want to try and flesh out in discussion is what the common building blocks are from your own experiences of the commons. Mark, are you there? I don't know if you can unmute, turn video on. No. Oh yeah, here we go. Excellent. That looks to be working.
I'm getting there.
Yeah, super. Yeah, so by all means, give the reflections on your example, which came more from the private sector, I think you said in the chat.
So can people see these slides?
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
we can. It's not in presenter mode.
Well, if I go to presenter mode, it might not. Well, it'll do something funky. So I'm worried that I'm going to lose control. So
okay, yeah, that's
I'll
fine.
stick this way if you don't mind. So quickly, in Europe, announced a thing called European Data Spaces. There was an earlier communication in roughly 2018 that sort of talked about it vaguely, but it got very precise, or much more precise, in early last year, about a year ago, in a European strategy for data. Having said that, that document did not define what a data space was or is, but it did announce an intention to create data spaces in 9 cross-domain, pan-European sectors. So industry, Green Deal, mobility, health, you can read them there. The asterisks indicate funding that is planned in the upcoming Digital Europe work program, which has not been released, but it's being circulated, so people have seen it. And so there will be roughly 100-odd million euros for industrial data spaces, a Green Deal data space, mobility data space, 2 health data spaces, as well as data spaces in agriculture and public administration. So there's clearly linkage to the research, science, innovation world. And so I think it's important to think about how this all might work together. The next thing to talk about is that there's in Europe a thing called Gaia X, which is a German-French announcement, government announcement to create essentially a sovereign data cloud in Europe. And this is the picture that they've been using. So it does actually have quite a lot of analogies to, for example, the NIH Data Commons model with the data at the top, infrastructure at the bottom, and various services in the middle. I'm not sure I entirely agree with the way things are laid out, but what's interesting is when you look at those federated services, the F of FAIR is basically about a catalog. The A is about having identity and having some ideas about how you can use the data. Ditto, there's an expectation of interoperability and reuse. So there are some real parallels between what Gaia X is unwittingly doing in terms of implementing FAIR. But there is a lot of discussion about where does Gaia X finish and where does a data space begin. And so we're trying to put together a bit of a picture that brings these ideas together. You know, what are these different industrial domain data spaces? What do they look like? How do they relate to what people are doing in the real world? There are trade ecosystems, there are healthcare ecosystems, there are agricultural data sharing systems. So we've come up with this picture, which shows different ecosystems living in an environment of common public data. And when I say public, it could be both open and fair. Each of these houses is built in the soil of the public data space, and the foundations, those blue things, dive into those, providing technical interoperability, semantic interoperability, organizational interoperability, as well as legal interoperability. The extent to which they're handled in the public data space as opposed to handled uniquely in different ecosystems is one of the reasons why there are different ecosystems, because there are sometimes different decisions made about legal interoperability between the different communities. How is healthcare going to work with mobility? They're going to have very different decisions about how they share data, what's appropriate, and so on. And so you need to have some separation of concerns there. The other thing that's important is that we have not only the public data space, which is the world and largely the object of all the models that we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes, an hour, but there also is a lot of private, shared, and unshared data. And in the business world, this is the biggest thing they're concerned about. They're less concerned about linking up with public data. They're more interested in linking up or managing their own data and how they might share it with their colleagues within their ecosystem, within their particular Kaizen or community of some sort. There are parallels to this kind of concern even in the research world, and we see it amongst scientific communities. We see it in various parts even in the research and science world. So there are some valuable ideas here that might be incorporated into the thinking in a research data commons, or if you will, the uncommon part of the research data commons. The other point is this diagram does not have technology in it. It doesn't have storage, it doesn't have compute, it doesn't have network. It does have a lot of the soft things, those vertical bars that were in the picture that Andrew and Sarah had put together. They're a deliberately bad picture. I would position this picture in front of you now as another deliberately bad picture, and maybe there's a way to make some of these pictures talk together. So that's all from me.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mark, for that. And I think that segues nicely to what we want to do in the exercise as well, because I'll actually just put my screen share on to the shared notes. Hopefully you see that. I can maybe make that a little bit bigger. So we have our, as was mentioned, deliberately bad picture. I'm just checking. Can you all see that? Can somebody give me a thumbs up? Or I don't know, Mark, if you're still on audio, if you can say, if you can put, yeah, okay, well, there are thumbs up, good. Yeah, so what we wanted to try and discuss is what are those elements that we should be including when we're thinking about the commons. And I thought that kind of came to me as well is whether we're thinking about some of the functions. So when we're hearing about the standards, you often saw things about, you know, using those standards to make sure we can access the data. So, you know, we could be thinking in lots of different ways, whether it's a verb about, you know, accessing, or whether we're thinking about an actual element or service like the data catalog, because the different models that we've seen represent these in different ways. But the way we've broken it down so far, we've been looking at the kind of infrastructure elements, so the kind of technical building blocks, so to speak, so that kind of layered stack approach, and also some of these kind of supporting elements or the human aspects about the governance and how we're managing the commons and making it work. But I would like to open out to the audience because we want to try and make this a discussion and to try and learn from your examples. So I would encourage people, if you're willing to, if you have things to share, put on your video so that I know. Or I don't actually know how you can raise a hand in this platform. I don't think you can. So put something in chat or turn on your video to make an observation.
So Sarah, one of the workarounds we've been using in some of the other sessions I've been in is stealing an idea from the technical advisory board and just typing hand in chat, which seems
okay.
clunky, but seems to work.
Okay, and now I'm going to do my teacher mode of sitting patiently waiting because somebody will break at some point and say something. Claudia.
Yeah, you cannot wait too long for me because I'll always jump in. I was just thinking of a similar exercise I did with researchers from many countries about the elements of an open science environment. Okay, and what I see missing there, but maybe it's not to be part of there, are the values behind the whole enterprise. Okay, like, I don't know, openness, trust, whatever, yeah. Just as a big circle around it. Okay,
yeah,
but
it's interesting. This came up when we were doing the definitions. So Andrew, I don't know if you caught the very start of the session, but Andrew talks through how we'd created a definition of the commons. And one of the things that came out were those common values about transparency or inclusivity, you know, making sure people are represented, that you have people from all the different stakeholder groups. Sandra has a hand raised and possibly Devika too. Sandra, do you want to unmute? Yep. Hi.
Hi. Yeah, somehow sometimes the video doesn't react in this platform on
That's my... okay. I have to click it twice every time.
Yeah. So one topic I think is also really important or two is interoperability, if that would be mentioned, because I know it's an infrastructure somehow there, also in data and everything, but I think it's an extra topic, interoperability between all the different solutions, or have building blocks to work with. And the other thing would be, I would also support Claudia's idea, but also something like ethics maybe, or code of conduct, which is really important also for communities, I think, in our time. So maybe in this kind, if we look factor, yeah, diversity, equity, and inclusion might be a good topic also for community work. That might go too far in this area, so I don't know, but yeah, something to mention, maybe something to include.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. I mean, that comes up a lot in the EOS work. So the things we're doing through the association, trying to make sure that we are open and inclusive, that we engage, the whole range of countries, that it isn't something that's kind of West dominated, or, the countries that are more advanced. So I think that's really important, because the notion of the commons is that it's for the common good, it's for everyone. So, and when we're thinking about RDA, that's a huge issue for RDA too. We need to engage the global south and try and put everyone on a level playing field. So Kieran had a hand raised, and then Angela.
Hey Sarah, how are you?
Hey.
Like the thing I observed from most of these is that they're fairly technical focused, and as Sandra was also saying, we need to look at the social and the organizational context in there. So Oscar was giving a presentation earlier on in one of the sessions I ran, and he was running through the collaboration framework that EOS had. So that's got things like legal and the organizational context, the licenses, the copyrights, the rules of engagement. I think that all of those should be considered as well as part of this, as well as participation models. What are the models that I use for getting people to actually participate in there? So yeah,
Yeah. That uptake is actually a big one. We can't fall into that same trap of building it and nobody comes. And I see you'd put a +1 in the chat as well to the interoperability, which I think is a really core aspect. And like I said, on a number of the visualizations, we've seen people kind of have it at the outside edge, because it's kind of this cross-cutting element. We certainly need to include it as an aspect of the commons. The standards are the glue that holds it all together.
Well, yeah, and a good discussion happened yesterday on that topic at the benchmarking one as well. The question was raised: why are we looking at interoperability across these different domains?
Yeah.
And I think the answer for that is that that's something that evolves. I mean, the research is becoming increasingly interdisciplinary. And we can observe that over time, interoperability becomes an issue, even though when we start off, it may not be. So starting to think about it from now, given that it might actually only need to eventuate in 5, 10, 15 years down the road.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. So I invite Angela up, and then Hans.
Hello. Hi. Actually, something that Kieran just said made me revise my question. Originally, I was going to ask for human subjects data, something that underpins everything we do is privacy and security, and it's really sort of critical. And but then listening to Kieran talk, I'm wondering what is it that you're actually trying to do here? Is it a model to help people understand if they themselves are a commons, or are you actually trying to build an interdisciplinary research data commons that would have these elements?
So we're trying to map out essentially the elements of what's going on in work in various different spaces. So like the European Open Science Cloud or ADRDC, and try and define the commonalities so that we can help with alignment and integration across these different spaces. So this group itself, this RDA group, won't be building a commons,
right?
But it's about trying to advance work in that sector, because there's kind of new initiatives coming all the time as well, and helping people understand and learn good practice from other areas is what we're aiming to do.
So I guess the point though is for to the extent that the data that you're talking about is subject to sort of different constraints, maybe privacy and security is important in one space but not another. So does it belong here? That's my question, I guess.
Okay, and I would say it definitely does belong, even if it doesn't apply. So I think we're never going to get a single model that works for everybody. But if we're able to describe the elements that are involved, and in some cases, you know, it might be a subset of those that are applicable, and that's still really important. So within EOS, we've talked about, you know, addressing the low-hanging fruit first and starting with the open data as like an easier use case, but certainly we have to deal with all of the security and privacy issues as well. I see Tamay had put a comment in the chat about changing the labels. I agree. I think that sounds really useful. Technical and social enablers. And Hans, if you would like to put your comment in.
Yes. Actually, I have two comments. Or three, 2.5. Actually, I think I would like to reinforce. Yes, we must think about how people from lower and middle income countries can access and make use of this of Commons. And number one, for this reason. Number two, for the privacy reasons which Angela just mentioned, and the problem of transferring large data sets or so. I think such a commons must include ways to do analysis of data. So it must not be outside of the commons in a way.
Yeah, so all of those analysis tools, the ability to compute and do the analysis is there in that environment too.
To put it bluntly, there must be a way to run a Jupyter notebook within the commons, for example. And the second actual observation is, I think there must be an attribute that it must be competitive because of the elephant in the room. We see in earth sciences that young people, let's say, are migrating to things like Google Earth Engine or so, because not only of the computing, but also because there are some important data sets already there. And so there might be a drive to ever more data in that area. So whatever this global commons is, it must be competitive with these things or preferable to them.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Yeah. Otherwise, you lose the users to other platforms, and then we also lose control over our data, as we've seen in previous examples. Any other comments or hand raising? I'm just looking at the time. We've probably got time for one final one if anyone wants to say anything. Otherwise, I'm going to hand over to Karen Payne, who's running a kind of parallel group to this on defining benchmarks. It's a working group that's kind of spun out of this interest group, and we'll just have a little bit of an overview on that. And I see we have a Kaylee in 15 minutes, so I better keep to time so we can all join in the dance. Karen, are you there, or Mark? This is a platform that people can easily hide on. Oh, Karen isn't here, so maybe it's Mark. Sorry.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if Karen's here.
No, she's not. I've just searched.
She's not. Okay. In that case, I'm not actually sure where the deck is, so I'll give a verbal summary. So as Sarah mentioned, the benchmarking working group was the one and only kind of spin out working group from the GORC interest group. And to some degree, it anticipated a lot of this, it would be supported very much so by a lot of this conversation, because the goal of the benchmarking working group is to create a matrix of benchmarks and metrics. Benchmarks you can almost equate with the kinds of conversation we're having here, and that are those different functional components or layers in the typology that we're discussing here. So the goal of that group is to do some background research and work to look at the various bits of documentation and information relating to these functional components, and then derive a set of benchmarks, which you can think of as benchmarks that would allow you to do a comparison across research commons on particular elements of functionality, and also could define a set of metrics. In addition to that, of course, we're
setting up a set of tools that we can use to consolidate the various documents and papers and various research components that we find to support the work. So those will go into a shared Zotero library. The meeting that we had yesterday or the day before, I can't remember.
Mark, I found Karen's slide if you'd like me to pop them up.
Oh, sure. Okay, thanks, Andrew. Sorry, I was focused on taking notes and I didn't, it would just takes me long enough for my computer to unmute myself, let alone find a set of slides. And I should say that Karen and her colleague Alicia at the World Data System International Technology Office have really done a lot of the work on this initiative. So that's, I did want to highlight that. Mm-hmm. So if once you get those shared, Andrew,
you should be able to see it now.
All I see is the click to escape full screen.
Not massively helpful, I agree.
Yeah, no, the screen sharing in Juno, I'm afraid to say, is very confusing. I'll wait, I'll keep going, and if you get that up, you can just go to the further down in the stack where there's a series of 4 icons representing the workflow. So in the conversation, we asked those that were part of the session to give their thoughts on a proposed workflow. And that workflow would start with that research that I've just been describing. And one of the important elements that we got a lot of good feedback on was what is the lens or the lenses that we should use through which to do that research. So the suggestions, there were 2 that rose to the top. One was looking at these various functionalities and the derivation of benchmarks and metrics through a individual research commons or regional lens. Yeah, that's, and if you just skip forward until there's 8 icons there, Andrew. Perfect. And so that was one lens, and the other lens was essentially this typology that we're talking about here. So step 1 we've partly done, and some of the individuals who presented today and presented yesterday are those target list of commons that are in the first icon. That target list of commons that we initially identified when we created the benchmarking working group also formed the basis of the review that our colleagues at DRI and RDA and the DCC have done for EOS in doing some initial work here. So what we've done is gotten the input we need to go ahead with this kind of workflow that you see here. So we've created a Google form that we will ask various owners, if you will, of Research Commons to submit ideas for benchmarks and KPIs. Others in the broader community would also be able to do that. And then we're going to create two subgroups or task groups. One, again, that will look through the lens of individual Research Commons and regional aggregations, and the other specifically at the typology. And through that literature review, we will collect those benchmarks. We'll discuss them in the broader working group, and then we will conduct outreach into the various global research infrastructures community. And the goal is by November 2022 to have a final output, which would be an adoption plan. And in between there, so RDA 19 and 18, we would obviously continue the work. And and you can see the different draft outputs that we're planning at the top. So if you will, this interest group is the conversational context and finessing the typologies and the definitions and further facilitating discussion about this concept of global open research commons. Then the benchmarking working group is an attempt to present operational aspects of all these various levels that we've been discussing, from from the governance and policy and legal context down to the architectures. And then a complementary set of work is happening with colleagues at the Chinese Academy of Sciences and CODATA, and it's called, to, I suppose, mostly to distinguish it from the RDA work, the Global Open Science Cloud initiative, and that will look at specific use cases and work with actual existing and emerging cloud instances to look more closely at not just implementations, but also how we can use these benchmarks and metrics to enhance global interoperability. So that's a really high-level summary. I'm happy if people have any questions. As I said, Karen Payne and her colleague Alicia are doing a lot of the work that will soon be represented with a set of communications out to the broader community for folks to get involved in those 2 initial task groups.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mark, and huge kudos for stepping in last minute and being able to rattle off about the work that's going on in that working group. And I think I'm going to draw us to a close because we just have a few minutes left in the session. I don't see anything new on the Q&A. So just a huge thank you to the other co-chairs of the group and also the presenters of the lightning talks and all the others who've also responded to that form. It gives us really useful inputs both for the typology that we're working on, but also for the work in the benchmarking group. There is a rerun of this session happening tomorrow, and I think there's a rerun of the working group session as well. We can double check and we can paste those in the chats. But obviously this has also been recorded, so you can, if colleagues haven't seen and want to catch up, you're by all means welcome to share that recording with them. So yeah, thank you very much to everybody. There is a Kaylee in 5 minutes, led by my old DCC colleague, and given that we haven't managed to get to Edinburgh, I hope I'm going to see you all there dancing. So see you soon. Bye bye.
Video of this session, right? It's a new session.
The Kaylee? Yeah.
The rerun, yeah. Okay, thank you. See you with the rerun. This was excellent.
Okay.